Hello everyone, and welcome to the online conference on the future of responsible brain research. The event today is hosted by the Responsible Research and Innovation Group in the EU flagship Human Brain Project. I'm Lise Bitz, Senior Project Manager at the Danish Board of Technology Foundation, and I lead the work on responsible research and innovation in the Human Brain Project. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues and co-hosts, Inga and Katinka, and could you please introduce yourselves?
I am Inga Ometsane. I'm Senior Research Fellow at the Montfort University, and in the Human Brain Project, I'm chairing project-wide dual-use working group.
I'm Katinka Evers, and I'm Professor of Philosophy at the University of Uppsala, Sweden. And in the HBP, I've been leading the Ethics and Society group and the research on philosophy and neuroethics for almost 10 years now.
Thank you, Inga and Katinka. It's really very nice to be here with you today. And online, we are joined by our colleague Aline Sales, who's a senior researcher at Uppsala University and leading the work on neuroethics and engagement. And she'll moderate the keynote talk today. In the chat, we also have two colleagues, Sissel Fibecker Ladegaard and Augusta Bennebæk. And all of us have looked very much forward to welcoming you here today. Now, the focus of the conference are questions, of course, on this big topic, the future of responsible brain research. And what it is we would like to discuss with you and with all of our panelists are questions on how to advance work on neuroethics, society, and philosophy in research and innovation in the future, both practically but also conceptually. And also we would like to discuss with you on the status of approaches to responsible research and innovation or towards developing more socially desirable and sustainable science and technology. And to do that, we have developed a program in 4 parts. So the first session of today is on approaches to responsible research and innovation, or novel approaches. As many of you in the audience probably also would know, in order to do responsible research and innovation, you need to work interdisciplinary. So our second panel today is on interdisciplinary collaboration, experiences, lessons learned, and ways forward. Then we have an afternoon break before we come back with our keynote talk on brains and machines, the common ethical ground of AI and neuroscience, which will be given by Marcelo Ayenka. And finally, we end the conference today with a panel discussion on future perspectives on responsible brain research. And as I said, we are really incredibly excited to get started and to be here today and to hear from this great group of people that we have in the lineup today. And equally excited to hear from you, the audience. And that's why today we have organized 2 different ways of where you can participate. So one, or both of them, I think you will probably be very familiar with. So you can ask questions to the panelists in the Zoom chat. And please use the Zoom chat and ask the questions continuously throughout the conference. Don't wait until the speakers finish. We have a team of moderators that supervise the chat, and those moderators, they will make sure that as many questions as possible reach us here in the studio. Then we also use Slido. You can join us also using the Slido app on slido.com. And the joining code is hashtag 4271146. And the code should also appear in the chat. Yes, and before we go to the first session, I would also like to inform everyone that we are recording. So we are recording the conference and all the sessions today. And the videos will be online on the Human Brain Project's YouTube channels and other YouTube channels of partners in the Human Brain Project. So that is something to be aware of. And I think that was it for all practical issues, and we're able to get started with the first session of our conference today. Yes, so let's get started with the first session. To everyone who might have just joined, a very warm welcome to the conference on the future of responsible brain research, and also now to our first session. In this first session, we will explore novel approaches to steering research and innovation towards socially desirable goals. One can argue that social desirability and sustainability were two of the central ambitions around which this framework of responsible research and innovation was developed. And in the context of the Human Brain Project, we have had 10 years to try out different approaches towards responsible research and innovation. And that's what we would like, of course, to reflect upon and build upon with you today. This has included, for example, exploring dialogical approaches to ethics, foresight. We've combined digitally facilitated and face-to-face methodologies for citizen and public engagement. We've had working groups and other kinds of collaborative mechanisms within the project. Now we stand at the end of this journey, and we have invited outstanding scholars to help us reflect on that journey and also to help us point towards future and steps and next steps on this journey with responsible research and innovation, and also to help us think through that framework also in connection to new and emergent discourses, for example, on open science. And for that purpose, we have with us what one might call one of the founding fathers of the whole conceptual framework of responsible research and innovation. We have with us René van Schoenberg, who's a senior research fellow at Kate Hamburger College, Cultures of Research at the University of Aachen. Hi, René. It's very good to see you. Also joining us, Stiviana Desali, lecturer in sociology and research fellow at the Department of Sociological Studies at the University of Sheffield. Hello, Stevie. And from the Human Brain Project, I have 4 colleagues in the panel. First is Bernd Stahl, Professor of Critical Research and Technology at the University of Montfort. Hello, Bernd. And also my colleague Niklas Badum from the Danish Board of Technology, Senior Project Manager. Hello, Niklas. And from the Human Brain Project as well, Manuel Guerrero, who's at the Center for Research, Ethics and Bioethics at Uppsala University and also the University of Chile. Hello, Manuel. And finally, we have with us Karen Grasenik, who's the founder and managing partner of Convelop. It's very good to see all of you here today in the panel, and I look very much forward to our discussion. Now, before we begin with the panelists, I would just like to again remind the audience to ask questions in the chat. So please use the chat to ask questions continuously as the panelists are speaking, and don't wait until the end. And also, again, please remember to join us on the Slido and put your associations in continuously. And the question that we ask you to react to is what words come to mind when you think about responsible research and innovation. And we will use this word cloud later on in the session today. With that, I would like to invite the speakers, the first speaker of today. So the first speaker of today is René. And René, I've asked you to reflect on this question. Based on your experiences, what do you think the next steps should be for responsible research and innovation practices? What type of activities are needed to continue the work? Please take the floor.
Okay, well, thank you, Liz. I just try to answer your question on where we have to go from now on. And I think This has to do with the relationship between research and innovation. I think I hope you can all see my slides.
Yes, I think we can see your slides, but there might be some problems with the sound.
Okay, I will see if I can fix this.
I hear you perfectly well.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I can hear you as well. So I think.
Okay, so as long as you and the panel can hear Renee, then we're all good.
Okay, all right. So, well, I mean, let me just start from the part which is not so evident from me when looking to the Human Brain Project, and that's the relation with innovation. And just very shortly, if we take to the history, we know all the things about the electroshock. This was the first used in 1938, first regulated as a medical device in 1976, and only 2011 there was a discussion to require pre-market approval for this type of therapy. Same history for what is called electrotherapy stimulation or neurostimulation in general. We have a very long history, but also from that, we actually don't know what the underlying principles are and how the mechanisms work. We have no idea up to date. Same is, of course, for a large extent for the more newer forms of brain stimulation. Now, for the human research, human brain project, I sometimes had the feeling, I may be wrong, doing research without knowing what we actually are after. Let's say the Human Brain Project is a sort of mission-oriented research, but I had the impression it's very much technology and data-driven. This raises some epistemological issues. So can we have actually all the data to simulate or understand the human brain? And if we think we have all the data, do we then know what it means? Now, these are a little bit rhetorical questions, of course. But my fear now is that a technological exploitation of premature data, given our history of innovating without knowing, will lead to a flurry of future devices which might actually shift an open and publicly funded research project, which is done impressively in an open science way, which is a good thing. But then in the innovation part, there will be a shift to a public. There's a disbalance between the public-private disbalance, because I fear that there might be a privatization from all the algorithmic processing of brain data. So this, together with the technological hype, may lead to a too early application of technologies, still in the vein of the history of all this stuff, that we actually don't know what we are doing. We see also this hype, for example, for artificial intelligence in drug discovery, which started 10 years ago, did not lead to any substantial new drug, by the way. Now, the rationale of why responsible innovation, much of it is echoed by your work in the Human Brain Project, which I'm very happy to see. So that's the line. We have to align science technology with broadly shared values. We have to practice open scholarship, notably to make our research and data more reproducible and responsive to societal demands. What I think is still open question is how we can actually proceed with an implementation of anticipatory governance. And Lizzie already recited actually my key part of my definition of RI, and it is that we want to drive research and innovation to social desirable ends. Now, how do we do this in this context? This is, of course, the difficult issue. Now, for that, we need better governance mechanisms for the outcomes, science and technology and innovation. And we don't have these mechanisms sufficiently. It means an other way of doing research and also doing innovation and also governing it. And I think especially public authorities have to become more proactive in research and innovation in order to deliver indeed on social desirable ends. Now, the case for anticipation is actually one of the elements for anticipatory government could actually be a form of social societal mission-oriented research in an RRI fashion. And I think with the new framework program and the Commission has now produced is actually a step forward, because there the missions are not so much technological centered, but they are centered on social objectives rather than technological objectives. They are co-designed and co-created by Open Science, and maybe we come back to this, how this happened in the Human Brain Project. Stakeholder commitment, not just participation, but also a commitment to social objectives, which have been deliberated in a larger context. Employing foresight, which you actually did in the project as well. This is very important because there are changes in science and societal acceptance. That means employing foresight and also monitoring is very urgent in these cases. Obviously, citizen engagement, which you have practiced to a large extent and in an impressive way. It will also have to lead to more and better research agenda setting of research. Finally, we have to have a better feedback to public policies for research and innovation policy. So now, just I end my story because I think I have a few minutes. Where's now the ethics in this part?
Well, actually, 5 minutes has passed, so.
All right. Well, very shortly then, I think I can fully agree with you, Lies, and Bernd on that we need to go to an ethics in the terms of normative design of research and innovation, and that ethics cannot be reduced to scientific integrity. So my end of the case is actually, and that's the actual issue for today, I think, that we need a new governance, and that means, in my words, co-responsibility of science, public authorities, industry, and citizens. And I think it's notably the role of public authorities, which has to be redefined in order to do what RRI is supposed to do, namely delivering on social desirable ends. Sorry to be then too long, Lies, but thanks for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Renee, for opening this first session with this very thoughtful and I think a kind also recap of some of the work that we've been trying to do and helping us, towards looking towards the future. And now, as I've said to everyone in the preparation, we'll try to be strict on time. Let's go directly and strictly to the next panelist, which is Stevie. And I don't know if you can see, but I have this very good technology here, which is an hourglass that I'm turning around, and that's why I know exactly 5 minutes. So, Stevie, with that threat, please take the floor.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk more about socially desirable and sustainable science and technology more generally, not so much the Human Brain Project, because I'm not familiar with the details of it in the way that Renee is. But I think what I'm going to say is fairly generalizable. So I started my postdoc career in 2013 on a project called Making Science Public, and my particular project was on the emergence of RRI. So I've always stood in this kind of odd relationship to it. And a lot of my thinking since then has actually been about how we can use RRI to do exactly the opposite of what the EU wants it to do, which is to direct our energies towards innovation for growth, growth, growth. And what I've come to realize is that it's exactly this emphasis on economic growth that can sometimes make RRI a hollow pursuit because of the way that it shapes funding streams towards what's the fastest thing we can get to market rather than what's the actual problem that you want to solve. So I should say I'm not arguing against RRI as Bernd and as Renee and as other colleagues have laid it out at all, far from it. What I'm arguing is that the limitations that have been placed upon it because of the growth-oriented work that it's been made to do have had a real effect. And I think RRI could do a lot more and could be a lot more. So I run a group called the Fourth Quadrant Research Network. And, we have argued for this in a book called Responsibility Beyond Growth. What happens when you actually look at innovation from what we call the fourth quadrant of the innovation matrix. So, the one that's actually for responsible stagnation. And we specifically are looking at what does that mean? What kind of new possibilities does it open up if you place RRI in the context of global economic stagnation? And when you take part of your ethical approach, the fact that there are systemic limits that we are overshooting, one of which is how much social inequality an economic system can actually sustain before it implodes. And I live in Britain, so I'm watching that. And I think, though, that we have to acknowledge as scholars and as scientists and as engineers that we are embedded in these broken, growth-addicted socio-political systems, and that we ignore that at our peril. So if you can acknowledge that, if you move away from the business economics definition of innovation as just new goods and services for the market, which means achieving monetary value, and you look more broadly at how innovation as a human activity is defined elsewhere, as just the take-up and the circulation of novelty, this allows you to support other values. And I think this helps to take what we call a growth agnostic approach to innovation. So just briefly, the definition of RS is that it's a particular configuration of change in which ethics matter, they're central, where the social is not brushed aside to focus on the technical, and monetary value is not allowed to outweigh other values-based concerns. It's one of restraint, it's one of finding new ways of living gently on the earth with each other, and developing new ideas in a way that considers the scope and the pace of change, considers that to be part of innovating responsibly. So that's more at the philosophical level. In my more practical level, I do a lot of work with roboticists. I do a lot of training of young scholars. And I work more with taking the area concept and turning it into what we call aria. So rather than engaging, it's about including. So it's looking at, yes, how do we draw in some of the parts of the EU's RRI framework that are not accounted for in aria, like gender equity, things like that. But it's also about thinking more beyond stakeholders, but other people, other knowledges. It might require social innovation, by which I mean novel social structures and relationships. So things like new legal frameworks, but in general, focusing more on process because the outcomes are so difficult to determine. And so I've been really interested personally to read about how ethics was handled in the HPV, because it was so embedded. And in my experience, I've always been sort of the bolt-on. I'm either brought in as a consultant to help scientists reflect more deeply on how RI might be embedded in the project they're doing, or in training younger scholars in how to think more reflexively. So more on that anticipate, reflect, include phase, and not so much around for the action part. So I think I'll just kind of end because I'm coming to the end of my time. I think I just want to briefly say that I think in terms of the status of RI, where we are right now, is that we are mostly continuing to move in a direction that supports reflection and that supports research ethics, which William Knight's essay shows. And that I think as we're training newer generations in a newer way to think about these things, I think we are training a generation that is more comfortable with ideas that technology is not determined, that it's a product of decisions, and that by opening that up to question, we can more clearly direct the decisions that are being made along the process of innovation. And at that point, I think my timer is out, and I'm going to say, I do feel that there's a change in research culture underway, at least in Europe, and I hope beyond. And thank you very much for having me to talk about that.
Thank you very much, Stevie, for this thoughtful also contribution to the panel, and very good on time. Thank you very much for that. And so it's a perfect, I think, introduction actually to the next speaker of the panel, which is Bernd Stahl, who's not only a professor at the Montfort, but also the ethics director of the Human Brain Project. So without further ado, Bernd, please take the floor.
Thank you, Lise. Can you hear me?
Yes, and I'm even stricter on my colleagues. They only have 3 minutes.
Okay.
So
Yeah. You asked me to prepare a statement on what we think is novel
yes.
in what we've done in the HBP and what we can learn from it. So
Yes.
with regards to the question what's novel, my first point would be that a lot of it really isn't novel. So in preparation for the end of the project, I looked at the question of what we identified as ethical issues at the beginning. So somewhere around 2014, we came up with what we called a map of ethics, an ethics map, a representation of various things that we thought are worth looking at. And I just revisited that a few weeks ago, and I found that a lot of it is just the way it was. So a lot of it hasn't changed, is still there. Now, some emphasis has changed. Some things have become more prominent. So AI ethics, for example, is something that we didn't have at the time. That is now very visible, even though there's a separate question of how novel that is in itself. Some things became less relevant. Animal ethics, for example, was something that was a big issue at the beginning. There's a lot less of this right now. So there was some change, but my point is really the overall landscape of issues hasn't changed as much as I thought it might have done. So that leads me to my second point, namely, how do we then deal with responsible innovation? How do we create this governance structure in a way that is responsive? And what we've done in the Human Brain Project, I think, is really very much focused around this idea of communication, of our discourse, of bringing people together and to allow them to discover the ethical issues that they are concerned about and discover ways of thinking about them. So we have written a paper in the past around this discursive approach to responsible innovation, which I still think is very strong, and it explains a lot of the stuff we've done. So it explains a lot of the structures, the data governance working group, dual use working group, our rapporteur program. So a lot of things we've done were there in order to help people communicate and talk about and find out collectively, co-create an understanding of what the issues are that need to be addressed. So that's, I think, what we've done. And now the final part of the question is, well, where does that lead us? What can we learn from that? Now, I think if you look at the world at large, innovation and technology development seem to be ever speeding up. Whether that's really the case or not, I don't know, but certainly there's a perception that that may be the case. And what I do think we can reasonably expect is that things will come together further. So more technologies bring together more types of issues. They will affect lots of different stakeholders. So it's not just an issue of one problem arising in a particular context that can be solved, but it's more a question of the overall scientific technical ecosystem that we live in, which raises issues across the system. So if that is a description of the world we live in that is appropriate, then I think the responsible innovation approach that we've created in the Human Brain Project may very well be a good way of addressing that. So it's not about knowing exactly what the problems are and what to do about it, but it is about developing structures of communication that allow people and encourage them to interact, to discuss these questions, and to collectively find solutions. So I think that is my answer to René's earlier point. So what would anticipatory governance look like? Well, very simply get people to talk about it and allow them to come to a collective view. I'll stop here.
Good. Thank you very much, Bernd, for that contribution as well. And so here we quickly need to move to the next panelist, which is my colleague also at the DBT, Niklas Badum, who will, I think, enlighten us a bit about the approaches that we've taken to public and citizen engagement in the Human Brain Project.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you, Lise, and thank you for the interesting presentations that went before me. I think in terms of what is novel here, I would say to begin with, the idea to integrate RRI the way that it has been in the HBP is in a sense novel, insisting that this should not be something that we add on outside, but make it a sub-project as it was to begin with, I think is actually novel. The extent to which it was practically integrated can always be discussed later on, but I think alone having the idea of integrating it in this way, I think was novel. Then, as Lisa also said, I'm going to be a little more specific on what was actually novel about what we did. And I'm just going to take the one example of trying to actually understand what do European citizens think about AI, and we actually did this first European-wide assessment of what do citizens think about AI as part of the work in the Human Brain Project, and part as a collaborative effort across this ethics and society group, right? In order to provide better instructions or better recommendations for how the Human Brain Project should approach artificial intelligence and handle it. And in this, I also see a very great potential for public engagement generally and for citizen engagement, because what is called for also from the Commission to a large extent in Horizon Europe is societally responsive science, right? This is one way of getting that societally responsiveness. It is by integrating these ethics and society elements into the very projects that actually do the science. So the ethics is embedded, so to speak. And I think there's plenty of scope for doing this in the future as well. We have plenty of new technologies that are complex and raise great questions about how will this affect our societies. We have huge societal divides already, and I think public engagement in particular has a potential of creating a common room for conversation and for dialogue and for understanding and for bringing new perspectives into this conversation and how we should guide and steer, how we navigate through these technological changes of society. And I think citizen engagement has the potential for creating a basis for better decision making, because we get new perspectives on what is actually important, what is it that people are actually concerned about, and what are their actual hopes. And with this, we can also gain new insights, or even just confirm assumptions. One thing is having assumptions, another thing is confirming them, and that can be important in and of itself. And then my last point is, as time is running out, that it can also help create legitimacy if you actually listen to the output of these public engagement processes. You can create greater legitimacy of the decisions you end up making.
Thank you very much, Niklas, for that contribution to approaches for responsible research and innovation. Now, the next panelist is Manuel Guerrero.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone in the panel. Very interesting insights. I think that to think about the novelty of the responsible research and innovation approach in the Human Brain Project, for that is important to take into consideration what is the Human Project. So which is the size and complexity of it. For the broader public, it's important to know that the Human Brain Project, there are more than 145 institutions involved, universities, hospitals, clinics, different centers, more than 45 countries are involved, and different disciplines, from basic neuroscience, theoretical neuroscience, robotics, simulations, but also management, communication, and a special part, a very important part of this big project is the responsible research and innovation colleagues who are working. So social scientists and people coming from the humanities, philosophers, sociologists, and ethicists. And this project is a 10 years long project, so it's a big research project. So how to deal with responsible research and innovation in such a complexity? And one example that we have been exploring, and that's part of the creativity of the Human Brain Project, is what we call the Ethics Rapporteur program. So the idea that ethics is not something that specialists do, so it's not something complementary to the project, but excellent science and excellent innovation means that the researchers in their own field of practice and discipline can be ethically aware. And for that, they need to, those who are not coming from the medical field, for example, who are used to work with medical bioethics, for example, but those engineers and computational scientists, etc., they need to be aware about their ethical issues that arise from their everyday work. And the Ethics Rapporteur program came as first as an idea from the Ethics Advisory Board very early in the project, in an analog way for the Special Rapporteurs for Human Rights of the United Nations. So the idea that persons from their own field of practice can be aware of something. And here we have colleagues from all work packages. So their rapporteurs, the ethical rapporteurs, are scientists or technicians or managers who are taking care. They are embedded in their everyday life activities, and they're together with us, the ethics coordination team in the project. We are opening this dialogue as a safe place, as Bernd mentioned. So the approach to this ethics rapporteur program, which is a liaison between each work package, so each activity of research and innovation with their ethics governance structures of the project, we have the rapporteur, which is this liaison. And with the time, they became specialists in their own field of ethics. So they begin as reporting about ongoing ethical and emergent and ethical issues. And then with time, with this facilitation process of us coming from humanities and social sciences, they became specialists in ethics in their own field. They are not ethicists, but they are technicians and scientists who are aware about their ethical implications of their work. And we have had one tool to work with this, is what we call the one-pager, and it's on oversights of ethical and social issues that emerge from each practical activity. And we are writing this document on an annual basis. And it begins from the work package facilitated by the RI people. So, and in an interdisciplinary context, it means that we have to convene about the concepts, what are we understanding about different things and the phenomena that we are talking about. And then from each work package, from each activity, we then compile it. And then we have an oversight from the work project about this ethical map or the oversight and of ongoing ethical issues. And then we can reflect and take action. So it's a way, this ethics rapporteur program, that has been in some way novel, because it's not only like Bruno Latour encouraged that social scientists and humanity people should go in the lab, but now it's the lab that is thinking about ethics together with us. And it has been a great experience with many challenges. Part of the challenges has to do to understand.
I'm sorry,
that
I have to stop you.
Yes.
But we can take maybe the challenges in the discussion
Absolutely.
afterwards.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, because this was, I think, a very good, very interesting introduction to some of the very practical instruments that we've tried to integrate into the Human Brain Projects for sort of collaboration on ethics and ethics governance. And our final speaker in the panel is Karen Grasenik, who has been also developing approaches for dealing with issues of gender equality and diversity in the project. Karen, please.
Thank you, Lisa, for the kind introduction, and for the panelists. I made some notes for the discussion. And I'm also keen to follow up on some things you said. Well, Bernd started with saying, what is really novel, right? Many approaches have been tried, and also Manuel said the Ethic Rapporteurs program has a history, was suggested, you know. So many things we apply, and maybe are things that come from, or measures that come from different sources and are in their combination unique, and they're unique because we had this great opportunity to implement them, meaning that there were resources available for them, right? So because in many research projects, I would say there are some challenges that we all face that have to do with how success is measured in science. So if we want to be responsive, reflective, you know, we need time for this. We need a lot of resources, time to understand each other in an interdisciplinary or even transdisciplinary discourse. So, and if your success is measured by having your individual name first and as often as possible on a paper, well, how much time will you spend in engaging in a transdisciplinary dialogue if you might not have the resources for it? Where does it show up? So I think these are the greatest challenges we have, is still this science culture. What can we do about this? And many women I talk to, and not only women, but many people who leave academia say, that this can even lead to a toxic environment. And maybe you also have some examples for this. I'm sure you have experienced conversations that go in this direction. And of course, there's an additional challenge that research is public funded. And that means no project wants the funding institutions to be attracted by something that did not work out. And that makes it really difficult to, you know, hold people accountable. For example, if it comes to discrimination, how people are selected for specific positions, how informal networks work, this is really hard and difficult to tackle. And I guess it's also true for, generally true for research integrity and RI. Well, so what have we done in terms of gender and diversity in this respect? We applied approaches from change management, first of all, starting with a vision, co-creating a vision, what we want to achieve in this project together. Then building a powerful coalition. You mentioned this communication, that communication is key, yes, but who should communicate, right? With whom, and who is finally taking the decisions. So you need a coalition of power, people who actually are in the position to govern and to change something. And we also established something like a diversity and equal opportunities committee, which somehow reassembles a microcosm of the HBP, because Manuel already mentioned one of the specific challenges, that is the size and complexity of the project. And in this microcosm, you have people from managing of science, engineers, scientists from different fields, people from different hierarchical levels, from the students to the top science and infrastructure board.
So Karen, I'm sorry, I'm glad that you managed to mention some of the complexity and also some of the measures that we actually did develop and apply throughout the project. But I'm afraid that, yeah, if we want to have a discussion, and we would also like to take some questions from the audience, I have to stop you here. So looking now first to this great panel of presenters that have now, you've heard each other's first perspectives. Is there something that you would like more sort of elaboration on, or that surprised you, or you would like to know a little bit more from each other? What did you actually mean when you said this? Some connections that came up that you hadn't expected? What do you think? I think we will then pull up the word cloud that I saw throughout the session has been populated with words from our audience who have told us what words come to their mind when they think about responsible research and innovation. And when we look at these words, ethics is big, co-creation, collaboration. And that might be interesting, considering that we are associating here with the future of responsible research and innovation. And I know definitely in some of the circles where I come, there's been some questions around the future of responsible research and innovation. What will that future be? Is there a future? And so it seems in this map that associations are mainly with ethics, collaboration and co-creation. And I wonder what kind of responses that spark in you as panelists.
Well, if I may, then I think touching on co-creation here, it goes back to something that I think both Renee and Stevie actually mentioned, right? That one of the core elements of this is ensuring that we also get not just when we have already started the process of research, but in the very design of the process, have this integration of other voices of society in the design. So through research agenda setting, right, and also having more substantial inclusion, I think was the word you used, right, to ensure that there is actually a concrete impact of this. I think I think that is also part of, if you're a little old school, you could say, a societal contract between the sciences and the surrounding society, that there is this need to actually consider what should we actually, which direction should we drive research, right? And not just have it, as you said, being put in front of a wagon of economic growth.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, please.
So I think that does raise an interesting question. I mean, what do we perceive, or what does society perceive to be the purpose of research and innovation, right? So it comes to on the word cloud, the central word ethics. So what is ethics? What are ethical principles we agree on? And also Stevie mentioned that earlier, the question of, do we want economic growth? Is that really what should drive innovation? Now, clearly, that's a legitimate question to ask. However, the people who drive that discourse are our democratically elected leaders, right? So these are the people who run government, who believe, rightly or wrongly, that society wants more money. And that the way that you justify expenditure, for example, on research and innovation, can be justified through this emphasis on economic growth. So my question then would be, well, are they wrong? And if so, how would we know what we would do about it?
Would you like to respond to that, Stevie? Yes.
I'll kind of happily take that on. So two things. Are they wrong? To a certain extent, yes, society does need a certain amount of money, obviously, in order to give us the things that we want, like health, education, welfare benefits, infrastructure, etc. But it's very different for developed societies like we have in Europe versus, societies that have not yet met the basic needs of their population. For those societies, growth is still absolutely necessary and desirable. But from our perspective, we are at a point where we put more and more in. We're getting increasingly extractive of resources, of labor, of everything, and we get less and less out. So it isn't really, even if you go back to the original founders of the field of economics, before it was called that, the questions that they're asking about growth are what kind of growth, for whom, to do what? And we've ceased to ask those kind of questions. So that's one answer. Very early on, when I was doing my postdoc, I worked with a group of activists who were looking at knowledge and technology. And it was before RI had become any kind of a discourse. And I asked them what they thought responsible research and innovation meant. And the definitions that they were coming up with were pretty much the definitions that everybody was talking about anyway. So I think there's an instinctive sense about we want the stuff that's out there for us, that's being given to us to do good things in society. And people aren't really thinking at all about economic growth. They're thinking about particular problems that they're hoping could be solved.
Yes. One thing that I was thinking about now that co-creation also came up in this word cloud, and Niklas, you picked up a bit on it. Renee, what is co-creation part of this new governance mechanisms of co-responsibility that you would be looking for, and what else should that governance mechanism contain?
Yeah, well, thank you. So I think co-creation, of course, plays a role on several levels. Like what Bernd, I mean, rightly so, I don't disagree with him, and I think it's also very important what you guys did in the project by bringing actors together to deliberate on particular ethical issues. But co-responsibility also plays a role on the interinstitutional level. So how the institutions of science, public authorities, universities, and so on work together to work together towards social desirable ends. And this is what actually now is lacking. So this is a problem which you cannot solve in a project. This is a problem which is a social political problem, which implicitly is raised with the call for more open science, because that already means a sort of reorganization the way we do science and fund science. But we haven't gone to the essential point, which relates actually to the issue of growth as well. I mean, because RI is, of course, about social desirable ends, and whether this leads to economic growth or not, this is a secondary issue. But how to do this, driving to social desirable ends, means that we need a better governance on, what type type of things we want to get out of science and technology. Now, this is an issue which the public authorities and the funders have to take on. I think there is some progress. I think with the new framework program, we have different type of missions than, for instance, the missions which were too much technological different, like the flagships like actually the Human Brain Project originally was. It's a too technological data-driven project rather than a social societal mission-driven project. I mean, this is not a criticism to you because you came into the picture when this was already decided. Now, so this is an issue of, this is a problem of the public authorities. Now, what to do about it? And just a short analogy, you know, if you look to the issue of mobility, then you have a public issue of, let's say, how do we, let's say, ensure autonomous cars to drive safely on roads? So then you can have ethicists thinking about, you know, optimizing a model which is good for everybody. But the fact is that we have left this issue up to the market. So that means that every car company will make its own device to make their car for themselves, for the car driver, the most safest run, rather than what is safe for all. Because the public issue would be to make the road safe, for example, rather than making the cars more safe. So the disbalance between what is public and what is private, and the erosion of what is public is taking place there, with how that people actually, you know, this goes actually in a certain way beyond ethics, but raises an enormous normative issue. And I think this can also happen to what we now have now. I think with the Human Brain Project, I think ideally you would have, if you go to eBrains as a research infrastructure, would be open accessible to all scientific disciplines where we can share data, share knowledge. This is all fantastic. But if this is unilaterally exploited by private sources, which again can make a disbalance between what we publicly want out of this research and what privately will happen, and what is actually not traceable anymore. Because if we start privatizing algorithms, like what's already happening in other areas, then we actually don't know what the industry actually is doing with their devices. Because this is my fear. I don't know whether you share this fear, that there will be, because of the availability of these data, where actually people actually don't really yet know what these data means, nonetheless will not stop industry to produce all kinds of devices which can use these data. So this is my fear, and I mean this goes to the innovation part. Yeah. And this is why I wanted to address it, because this oh yeah, sorry, yeah, I'm talking too long. Yeah. Sorry, Liz, you are right. I'll stop.
But let's go with that your fear, because I see Manuel and Karen that they would like to react. Maybe 2 short reactions to that. If you share this fear that Renee is explaining about the balance between public and private, and you know, this desire that we have of steering research and innovation towards socially desirable goals. And then I would really like to take a few questions also from the audience. Manuel?
Yes, I wanted to touch upon an issue that Renee highlighted. It has to do also with how we solve these fears, and is this tension between the ethical dimension of this type of projects, the normative dimension, and the social and the legal one. When we are working with the RRI approach within the project, many times we face the issue that we have to learn together as a learning organizations, that it's not about individual ethics. So it's shared responsibilities, and it has to do with these governance structures that we need to have, this institutional structure. But then when we have this development on ethical governance bodies, then we face the issue that we need also a legal framework to make some changes. And there comes in the political field, which is beyond the research project. And that's why we have been exploring this transition between the framework of responsible research and innovation within a research project to responsibility by design in the after phase of the project. So what's happened after that we have ended the project? And we have had these fears as well. So how we ensure that RRI approach and the ethical embedded ethics can continue, and that there we are talking about a political and institutional field. So these are creative tensions that we need to take into considerations, that science doesn't stop within itself, as Stevie also highlighted.
Yes, and that the RRI somehow is transitioned also into the next phase, which is something that we should talk more about. Karen, you had a brief reaction as well.
Yeah, sure. Following this course event, also started with asking, may I frame it again? Which society are we talking about, and whom in our society? And in this respect, I think it's good to be a little bit humble. It's always easy to, when we look backward, oh, things have changed, or we made some mistakes. That started already with Galileo Galilei or Newton. And having a background in mathematics, I'm also in favor of blue sky research, which I sometimes miss a little bit. There's some little bit of room, right, for blue sky research as well. So the question is, how can we come up with a normative approach that we can agree on, looking at the tensions we have in our societies? And I'm not sure what the answer to this might be.
Okay, so I would like to ask one question from the audience before we are, because we are coming a bit unfortunately towards the end of the session. But one question that came in through the chat is on the ethics dialogues approach that you mentioned, Bernd. What worked well with it, and what were the challenges, if you could do that briefly?
So the dialogues, I think, worked well in the sense that they brought together people from across the project. So we do have various fora. The rapporteur is one that Manuel mentioned, various other groups where we did manage to bring together scientists, both from neuroscience and technology, support workers, researchers, and so on. I think that worked in principle, but there were always practical challenges on the details. So getting the right people in the room at the right time was always difficult. That has partly something to do with general organizational stress that we all have. Everybody has tons of stuff to do, and it's difficult to find time for this stuff. And the incentives, and that I guess is a sort of a broader question, the incentives of doing this are very unevenly distributed. So while for us as the people getting paid for doing responsible innovation, that was what we're supposed to do, there were very few incentives for the scientists, for other people to engage with that. And I think that is something that responsible innovation as a discipline going forward should probably think about how to address that, how to do that. And that's not something that you can easily do on the project level. That actually, I fully agree with René's point. There's an important role to be played by funders, by policymakers, by society as a whole.
Thank you. And another question related to this that came in is the importance of formal structures for ethics support with focused expertise versus the embedding of ethics in scientific practices. What is more important? Is that something that you can answer, or would you say, well, both is needed? You can do different things.
Is that a question to anybody in particular?
I think it wasn't addressed to anyone in particular.
Right. So René has maybe that's a good start.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's quite a complete answer to this question, but now then very short. I would propose that for industries, in this case, for industrial associations, that from the Human Brain Project, a sort of draft for a code of conduct on how to proceed with innovations in this area would go forward. And I would make a plea to do slow innovation because of the uncertainties, and also because of a further discussion whether we actually need a much more stricter market approval of any devices which can come on the market. And I think this is a lacune. This is a governance area. This is where co-responsibility has to be implemented, and this is an issue which policymakers have to take up. But I think you can raise this issue.
Good. Niklas, a very short closing remark.
Yeah, thank you. It was just, I think the HBP has also showed that it doesn't need to be either or, right? I think the work that Manuel has done with the ethics rapporteurs program shows the importance of also creating awareness among the researchers. So if you integrate ethics into a project like that and distribute it, then you create a different approach and a different awareness, and it makes it, in a sense, not easier, but it makes it clearer for the people on who do the science that this is actually something that's important, and you get, if you like, some allies in the hard science that can also help you talk the language of that hard science when you communicate. Yeah.
Okay, so I haven't gotten like really any new questions. Yes, Emmanuel, you have a reply to that?
Yes, I only wanted to say it loud what Niklas said. One condition of possibility to have this type of work in this type of project is to have allies. That's fundamental and big ones, and that's an homage to, for example, Jean-Pierre Chagnon in the case of the Human Brain Project and others, that are scientists or technicians that are they have very legitimate within the field of practice, and they are taking this work, searching others for those who are coming from the social science and humanities. So having allies, it's very, very important, and broaden this alliance across the project.
Yes, Stevie?
I think just a quick note from outside. So my work has echoed what Niklas has found as well. And I think it's incredibly important, as something as big as the HBP now disperses, that those lessons and those moves towards transdisciplinarity that Karen was speaking of get taken outward and diffused into the larger section. That is actually how we move things forward in general.
Okay, so there are both fears and there are also promising developments. And of course, probably there's no new human brain project coming along anytime soon, so that the contexts in which we will have to work are going to be very different. We have still 3 minutes left for some closing reflections from the panelists.
I think that was my closing reflection.
Okay,
so.
yeah. If you still had something, because I feel like I've been pushing you quite hard throughout the talk, and we still have a little bit of time. If there's something you felt like you didn't get to say already.
Well, I mean,
otherwise, we could, yes, Bernd?
Sorry, Manuel.
And then Manuel.
But I think coming back to this the systems level view, I think responsible innovation can make a difference, can be relevant, but I think we should move away from the idea that you can sort out the ethics of research and technology on the project level, and think about how the overall scientific and technical system can be steered in a way that is desirable and acceptable and sustainable, right? And of course, that requires work on the project level. But I think the focus on the project level that you see in a lot of responsible innovation discourse is probably problematic.
Manuel?
Yes, I only wanted to close with, for the persons who are participating in the audience, if someone is inspired by this type of work, that the attitude that we need, that we have learned in the Human Brain Project, is intellectual humility. So we need to be very open and flexible. Here, it's not the philosopher, the social scientist that comes with all the solutions. No, that's something that we have to explore, and you have to find your place, but being always open to other insights and learning or not. Without that, ethics can be seen as ethics police, and that's not what we want.
Niklas, are you wanting to add something here towards the end?
Well, maybe to come back to what was talked about previously in terms of the fears of these developments, I think these fears are an even better argument for actually having these broader cross-disciplinary conversations that we have already been talking about, and having them, as you just said, in a way where we're not the ethical police, we're not the ones with the right answers, but we're actually going in a mutually explorative and with curiosity into this conversation, so both sides are actually willing to learn from what they hear and not think that they have the monopoly of truth, right? I think that that's extremely important going forward.
Good. So that's within the project and in the collaborations themselves. What about the policy issue? Is that what you have the solution to, Karen?
Well, I just thought that I fully agree that also, of course, from a gender diversity perspective, you have this label of being the gender police, right? So we have a lot of common in this respect. And of course, you also need these governance structures, the resources, the commitment from the top level, but also within the project. And in gender diversity, you would call that an inclusive approach, where you try to make sure that all voices are heard. This is, I think, something we have in common across all the topics we have been talking about.
We can do a lot within the project, but we cannot do all. We need help both within the collaborations, but also from the outside. And with that, I need to end the session for today, and I would like to thank all of you for so many inspirational inputs and for being here today, taking the time. And before you go, could I ask you to leave your key recommendations in the chat so that we will have them afterwards also? That would be really nice. And yes, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience. And now we have to move to the next session on interdisciplinary collaboration.